Hello, I'm Sebastian. Welcome to Nine Nar Trees podcast. Today, I will summarize and review the book. Treasure Islands by Nicholas Shaxson is an investigative exploration of offshore finance and the global network of tax havens that enable wealth to move, hide, and grow beyond the reach of normal regulation. Rather than treating secrecy jurisdictions as exotic outposts, Shaxson frames them as integral to modern capitalism and deeply connected to major financial centers. The book traces how offshore banking, shell companies, and legal engineering allow corporations and wealthy individuals to reduce tax bills, avoid scrutiny, and shift risks onto the public. It also shows how these mechanisms can accelerate inequality, distort markets, and weaken democratic accountability. Written for general readers as well as policy-minded professionals, the narrative blends history, political economy, and reporting to explain why the offshore system persists and who benefits. The result is a big-picture guide to understanding how hidden financial plumbing shapes everyday outcomes such as public services, fair competition, and trust in institutions. I will give you key takeaways from this book. Firstly, the offshore system as a global network, not a remote sideshow. A central theme is that tax havens are not isolated islands, but nodes in a tightly linked system connecting lawyers, banks, accountants, corporate service providers, and regulators across jurisdictions. The book emphasizes how small secrecy jurisdictions specialize in offering legal structures, low or zero tax rates, and confidentiality, while larger onshore financial centers supply capital markets, brand legitimacy, and enforcement capacity that can be selectively applied. This symbiosis helps explain why the offshore world is resilient. It is embedded in mainstream finance, not external to it. Shaxson also highlights the role of competition among jurisdictions, where governments market regulatory lightness and tax advantages to attract mobile money. That race can pressure other countries to weaken rules, creating a spiral that favors capital over labor and public budgets. Understanding offshore as a network shifts the policy question from targeting a few notorious locales to confronting a broader architecture of incentives, intermediaries, and political protections that make secrecy and profit shifting routine. Secondly, secrecy, shell companies, and the mechanics of hidden ownership. The book explains how secrecy is produced through legal and administrative choices rather than through cinematic hiding places. Key tools include shell companies with nominee directors, trusts, and layered corporate structures that can obscure beneficial ownership and make accountability difficult. These vehicles can be used for lawful purposes, such as cross-border investment planning, but the same opacity can enable tax evasion, corruption, sanctions evasion, and money laundering. Shaxson underscores that the damage often comes less from one dramatic crime and more from routine non-transparency that undermines oversight. When ownership is hidden, regulators and tax authorities struggle to enforce rules, competitors cannot easily assess counterparty risk, and citizens cannot see who benefits from privatizations, procurement deals, or political donations. The narrative also points to a critical imbalance. Sophisticated users can buy anonymity, while ordinary people and small businesses generally cannot. By demystifying the instruments and the professional ecosystems behind them, the book invites readers to view secrecy as an engineered product with identifiable suppliers and clients. Thirdly, how tax havens enable corporate profit shifting and market distortion. Shaxson examines how multinational companies can use offshore structures to shift profits from higher tax countries to lower tax jurisdictions, reducing effective tax rates without necessarily changing where real business activity occurs. Strategies can involve intra-company loans, intellectual property holdings, transfer pricing games, and contract manufacturing arrangements that allocate earnings to low-tax entities. While these techniques are often framed as technical compliance, the book argues that the broader effect is to erode national tax bases and tilt competition. Large firms with access to elite tax planning can undercut smaller rivals that operate mainly in one jurisdiction and pay closer to statutory rates. This can encourage consolidation, reward financial engineering over productivity, and pressure governments to offer incentives to retain investment. The topic also connects to fiscal capacity. When corporate tax revenues fall, states may rely more on payroll and consumption taxes or reduce services, shifting burdens toward workers and consumers. The analysis presents offshore not just as a tax story, but as a force reshaping market structure and public finance. Fourthly, political power, regulatory capture, and the persistence of offshore finance. Another important topic is why offshore finance remains so durable despite repeated scandals and public outrage. The book points to the political influence of financial sectors, the revolving door between government and industry, and a complexity that allows responsibility to be diffused across borders. Because offshore arrangements often sit at the intersection of law, accounting, and finance, reform efforts can be slowed by technical debates and incremental loophole creation. Shaxson also suggests that some governments benefit strategically from hosting or tolerating offshore activities, whether through fee income, geopolitical leverage, or support for domestic financial industries. This creates collective action problems. Each jurisdiction may prefer reform in theory, but fears losing business if it acts alone. The book highlights how transparency measures, information exchange, and coordinated standards are difficult to implement when powerful stakeholders can argue about competitiveness and confidentiality. By framing offshore as a political economy issue rather than a purely legal one, this section helps readers understand the incentives that keep the system functioning and the kinds of coalitions required to change it. Lastly, social consequences, inequality, governance, and the erosion of trust. Beyond lost tax revenue, Treasure Island stresses the wider social damage created by an offshore world that separates wealth from visibility. When elites can opt out of the fiscal responsibilities that fund infrastructure, education, and health systems, inequality can widen and social mobility can weaken. The book also connects offshore secrecy to governance failures, particularly in countries where corruption and capital flight can drain resources needed for development. Even in wealthy democracies, the perception that the rules differ for the powerful can corrode trust in institutions and weaken democratic legitimacy. Shaxson presents offshore finance as a system that can privatize gains while socializing risks, especially when hidden leverage and opaque vehicles contribute to financial instability. The result is not only an economic issue, but a civic one. Transparency, fair taxation, and accountable ownership records are portrayed as foundations of functioning markets and healthy politics. This topic ties the technical mechanics back to everyday life, showing how distant legal structures can influence public services, opportunity, and the credibility of the rule of law. In conclusion, Treasure Islands is best suited for readers who want to understand the real-world mechanics behind tax havens, including journalists, students of economics or politics, policy professionals, and curious citizens who sense that offshore finance affects daily life but have not seen the system mapped clearly. It can benefit the reader by giving a structured way to interpret headlines about leaks, corporate tax disputes, corruption cases, and regulatory reforms. Instead of treating offshore as a niche problem, the book encourages a broader view of how secrecy and cross-border legal structures influence inequality, competition, and public budgets. That perspective can sharpen critical thinking about policy proposals such as beneficial ownership registries, information exchange, and coordinated corporate tax rules. Compared with many books that focus narrowly on personal tax evasion or a single scandal, Shaxson offers a more systemic narrative that connects history, institutions, and incentives across jurisdictions. The value of buying this book is its ability to turn a confusing landscape into an intelligible framework, helping readers evaluate reform claims and understand why meaningful change requires coordinated political will as much as technical fixes. If you would like to support Nicholas Shaxson, you can buy the book through the Amazon link I've provided in the podcast description. After reading the book, please let me know what you think and share your thoughts. See you around.